I'll share a brief story about what we did with BESCO during the COVID times and share part of the report that we organized. Initially, when the whole COVID crisis started, as most of the people around here, we really didn't know what exactly to do. It felt very nice to be staying at home all day long, but because we were working online most of the other times, meeting with people and doing some policy advocacy on what to be improved in the country, things didn't change much. Apart from the fact that many companies started calling us and said, "Hey, we got our product. We believe we could help. We can give it out for free." So what we did was initially we spoke to the Ministry of Economy and also to part of the people in the Council of Ministers to say, "Hey, our startups are ready to give their products for free if they could help." So initially we reached out to all the companies that we work with and said, "Hey, give us the information of how and what you could provide to the country." So we made a list of, I think there were around 22 companies in the field of that could help businesses, the government, the educational system, which was nice, but still it was an ad hoc initiative. Then I guess around 7 or 10 days after the lockdown started, we started, because we're in constant communication with some of the other startup organizations in Europe, we saw that some of the other governments are having proactive measures on how they could support not only their businesses, but also their startups. So we said, "Hey, this is a really great thing, but what should we do?" In the first case, it's whoever reaches out to us, we can just share their opinion. But the other better approach is to actually do a report based on a study and survey. And this is how we started. So I'll share my screen. By the way, if you double click on the window, you'll be able to see the presentation in full screen, because you may not be able to see everything in a great detail. So now I'm going to share part of the report, which was called an economic impact analysis on the Bulgarian startup ecosystem during the COVID-19 crisis. I'll start with the fact that there's quite some information in there. So it's not going to be a very sexy startup presentation with a lot of images. There's going to be rather more data. So what you will about to see is I'll share part of the background, the key findings, what proposed measures we have, and finally I'll do a short comparative analysis with some of the measures taken by the governments of other countries that we think are most applicable in Bulgaria in our situation right now. So as I mentioned initially, when the company started reaching out to us, what we did is we spoke to our friends from other organizations and said, "Hey, we should do something about it." So before I start, I'd really like to thank all these organizations, EditBG, the Bulgarian the Bulgarian Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, Endeavor Bulgaria, ABLE, also all channels for helping us with the PR, and in addition, the European Startup Network and Allied for Startups, which are the organization which does what BESCO does, but we do it on a local level. They do it on a EU level. So initially, we wanted to make an outline of the most crucial problems that our startups experience in Bulgaria, and also we wanted to propose measures based on real data, not only on our gut feelings. So what we did is, although we're not researchers ourselves, and we have said it dozens of times that our focus and our activity is not related to doing reports, we decided to do this report in order to be quick and to add value. By the way, the report was written only for about 3 days, so I'd like to say a huge thanks of Ned Dervenkov. You may know him; he's part of the BESCO team, and he's actually the person who made this report. So it's kind of, he should take all the credit for it. So about the methodology, we started, as every research, with primary data collection. Initially, we had quite a few free conversations, but then we decided to make a survey on which we could base our data. In addition, we made a few, probably a couple of dozens in-depth interviews and focus groups with startups, VC funds, and other startup organizations. Then the secondary part of the research was we did a comparative analysis with the policies and measures that around 20 countries in Europe have have applied. So, by the way, you could download the report, go on the BESCO site on the blog, and I think the second or the third oldest post is with the report, so that you could be seeing it. And if you have any more specific questions, we'll be able to discuss. So, starting with the startup profiling, we started with exactly 100 Bulgarian-based startups. Most of them are, like, more than 50% are startups, but we also have some scale-ups. You could see in the right part that 50% of them have established markets and they're in their growth phase. 19% are in their R&D phase, and 31% have a validated business model but are still in their early traction. So this information will be important, so that whenever you see their struggles, you'll understand part of the data. So before, I don't want to spoil everything, but before the report came out, I honestly expected that most of the startups will be doing better off and not having this much trouble, because our hypothesis was that, okay, most of the startups are based online, they have international customers, so the lockdown shouldn't be an issue, and especially because most of them are digital. On the left-hand side, you could see the sectors. So we had around 27 different industries. You could have a look. Some of them are, of course, more than 40% are in the software business, but we've got biotech, gaming, food tech, fintech, all these buzzwords. The indicated annual revenue of all of these companies is 155 million BGN, which means that the average annual revenue per company is 1.5 million Bulgarian lev, which we thought is good, because it means that the Bulgarian startups indeed do have traction. By the way, I'll just have a quick look if there are any questions. Also, you can click F11 to maximize your browser to full screen. Thanks, Chrome, for this information. This would be good for everyone who's viewing to have this in mind. Then also on the startups, the team sizes, most of the companies, like 72% are less than 10 people, and 42% are up to 5 people, which shows us that still the majority of startups in Bulgaria are relatively small. And most of the new companies are quite new, without having specific details, because I didn't make this cut through the data, but I would say that around 40% of them are new companies, which means up to 1 year since their establishment. So, going to the key findings, probably the #1 problem that companies said is the risk of bankruptcy. So on this slide, you see all the forecasted risk levels. On the right-hand side, you could see in the forecasted risk in the next 3 months, and on the right-hand side in the next 6 months. So in the short term, everything seems quite okay, like the high to medium risk is 42%, as long as we know that in the long run and the 3 to 5 years from the point of establishment, more startups fail. However, looking at the 6 months period, we see that 74% are in medium to high risk of bankruptcy, which means that that unless certain measures are taken by both companies, investors, and the government, then most of these companies will die. Now, here I'd like to make a remark that although the core activity of BESCO is to communicate the needs of companies with institutions and be the communicational bridge, we don't want to just brag around it and say that the government is responsible for everything. So what we really want to do is help the companies, but we really want to be the voice and still share their needs with the government. And this is why we started this report. Its main people that it is addressed to are the Bulgarian government, the European institutions, and also other international startup organizations that we share knowledge and information with. The second largest issue that startups show are the forecasted revenue decrease. So you can see that in general, over 2/3 of companies forecast the drop in their revenue will be more than 40%. So you see that the majority, about 1/3, are expect a drop between 40 and 60%. So if we have to go on the more analytical part, it's really the cost structure of the company that would depend on whether it would succeed. On a later stage, we could speak more about the 40-60 measure and how useful it is. But if we accept the hypothesis that the greater part of the cost structure is related to salaries, then this would be the case. Excuse me, just a second. Yes, and we see that around 1/5 of companies expect a drop in revenue of more than 80%. And then whenever you see these numbers here, you could understand why so many of the companies are forecasting that they may go bankrupt very, very, very soon. Also, before I go, there's also the fact that some of the companies here are still not in the traction phase, meaning they're focusing only on R&D and they have no income, which means that the drop in revenue, however, this wouldn't be this much of an issue. The third largest issue that has been shared was the employee layoff forecast. So looking at the numbers, we see that 37% expect that up to 1/4 of the company will have to be laid off. Around 30% expect between 25 and 50% of their people to be laid off. And finally, only 17% each expect that either half of the company or more than 75% of the company would have to be sacked. In this case, by the way, talking to some companies, we know that some of the employees have said, "Hey guys, we believe in what we're doing. We're okay without having salaries for some time." Here, I'd also like to open the theme about the stock option issue, and this will be one of the proposed measures, because if in Bulgaria the stock option pool would be possible and vesting, then this would be the reason that many of the people to stay in the company, because they know that they have a share and they're not working with the company just because of the salaries that they get. Now, on the right-hand side, it was interesting of looking at the job positions that have been planned. Of course, we start with sales and marketing, because I myself come from this background. I worked in marketing and business development. I realized that if I was part of a startup right now, most probably I would have either be searching for a new job, or this would be a good opportunity for me to start a startup. Then you see administration, which probably the more technical people of you would say that this is the lower value-added initiatives, but I was quite amazed to see that other sort of excuse me, this should be engineers, not other engineers, but that around 13% of engineers should be sacked, which is weird, because usually developers and engineers and the more technical people are the ones that are creating the product. And also very often the founders themselves and the people leading the companies, in most cases in the Bulgarian context, are technical people. Also, we see the part managers, and you see that 7% of the companies have said that all of the people will have to be laid off. So I'm clicking to see if we've got any other questions. It is complicated. Okay, so I'll go through the presentation and then leave it for questions in the end. Then the next key finding is the revenue generating damage. So here you can see the order of importance of business factors. As I mentioned at the beginning, from my previous conversations and what I know is that really a majority of the Bulgarian startups and technical companies are working with international customers. However, the data shows that 65% are afraid of losing local customers, which means that the Bulgarian industry in general has opened in the last 2 to 3 years to working with Bulgarian tech companies, which is very good, because the companies can have early market traction in Bulgaria. And once they have happy customers here, it's easier for them to go internationally. The second largest factor is loss of international customers. And the third is lack of liquidity. So if the government can do little to to address the issue with the customers, it can do much with the liquidity, but we'll go on the proposed measures later on. The three other important factors are a disturbed supply chain, loss of employees that we mentioned, and lack of raw materials. So if we're not talking about software, where the supply chain and raw materials is not that crucial, then with product companies, this really is an issue for them, meaning that even if they had their customers, they're not able to produce their production in time, and this is really, I would say, a great issue. Finally, this is what the companies said, what kind of bridge funding they need and government support. So if there's someone currently looking who's part of institutions in Bulgaria or elsewhere, this is what the companies said they would need. Many of them said that if they need a rescue capital, a majority said it would be between 10,000 and 25,000 euro and 25 and 100,000 euro. And this really depends on the size of the company. In most cases, it's for their fixed costs, for their salaries, as well as for some of their equipment. Of course, we have some of the larger companies that need larger capitals. So if we add them up, around 25% need like more than 100K. Then also around 3/4 of the companies share that they're in medium to high risks of bankruptcy. Yes, actually, this is what I mentioned. So these are the measures that have been that have been supported by the startups. Most of them said they want to be able, the government, to do capital investments in them through the venture funds. There's a thing called venture debt, which we think is one of the best possible ways for the company to support companies, not directly investing in them, but pouring a debt within the venture capital companies, because they know their portfolio companies in the best way. So they will be the ones that will invest in them in the most relevant way. And also this would be a debt that they would give back to the company. So it won't be just a grant that would sink. By the way, only 21% of the startups say that they support the 60/40 measure. And the reason is mostly for bureaucracy reasons. Then another, by the way, I will elaborate a bit later on the fact that the government could become a customer of the startups, because this is currently not possible. For example, if you want to participate in a public tender, you have to be, in most cases, more than 3 years old, and to have, and in order to get high assessment, you should have been participated in other public tenders before, or to have approved traction of similar work. And by proved traction, this means that you should have papers which not only answer to the reality. Anyhow, around 13% of the companies have said that they'd like to have rescheduled payments to the budget, meaning deferred tax payments, etc. And around 12% of the startups say that banks should be able to finance the startups. So continuing in more detail with the specific proposed measures, probably the two focal ones are the government. Excuse me, before I go in, which are the main ones, especially in the report, and what we've been trying to say with BESCO is that we should focus not only on financial but also on non-fiscal measures, because they wouldn't be such a huge burden to the government. In addition, there are plenty of other, labor and organizations that just want money for salaries, etc. We try to bring high add value with non-monetary measures. So the first one, which we believe is very relevant, is that the government to become a customer of the startups. I already mentioned the issue that we have with startups participating in public tenders. In addition, there are no available calls or procedures. And by the way, this is neither on a national nor on a local level, where which are market driven and have purposes. The second huge, proposal is to have a functional fund of funds. I guess most of you have been following the topic, because currently we're waiting for a few VC funds to be officially launched, and this is still not the case. So the main proposal here is to have a faster implementation of the fund of funds initiative. Also, companies are proposing to have a supporting financial mechanism for existing venture capital funds that they would be able to exist and have a lifeline for their current portfolio companies that could be established. I mentioned this this a bit earlier, and by the way, this was proposed not only by the VCs, because you would say that if we spoke to VCs, this is what they would say: hey, give us the money. But that's also the case with the companies, because whenever if I have to recall on the times when I was actively in a startup, sometimes whenever I didn't know how to where to put my money, or we had certain discussions with my partners, then it would be the investor that we could look up to and seek advice from. Then we have the fund of funds that should temporarily cease the requirements for third-party capital fundraising on a level of fund manager, because currently the current procedures, if you want to apply for their procedure, then you should have up to, let's say, it depends on the different measures, but it's anywhere between 10 and 25% that you should fundraise by yourself. We believe if this requirement is put on pause, at least for a second, this would also increase the, excuse me, I forgot the word. This would be the reason that the fund of funds initiative will take place. Finally, we believe that the shortened and optimized administrative procedure would help not only VCs but companies as well. I don't think any one of us likes administration, so the less administration, the better off it would be for the whole startup ecosystem. And finally, we believe that EBRD and other similar companies would be able to be entitled to add additional resources in our funds in general. The other proposed measure, that it's the one that we've been working for the longest time, and I'm sure that most of you that are aware with what we're doing with BESCO, is the Contractual joint stock company. So with those of you that are not aware with the issue, what are some of the issues and problems that Bulgarian companies face? Further, we've got high running costs, mainly through the payout of salaries and reduced turnover, and this increased the liquidity of company. You saw the data before that around 20 to 25% of companies have liquidity problems. In addition, in Bulgaria, we don't have a convenient mechanism for allocation of employee-based option pool, and it currently doesn't exist. As I mentioned earlier, if we had, then then we would have a higher percentage of people that are employees of companies and not majority stakeholders to stay within the companies, because we know that in the startup business, very often it's about the passion. It's not about the money. It's not about the product. It's because we have passion for the problem. And everyone who has been an entrepreneur himself understands this. But on the other part of the table, we've got the employees, the people who are working. Yes, they believe in the idea, they believe in the team, but apparently they have to live, and someone has to pay the bills. And out of all of our conversations that we have had with companies, this has been probably one of the greatest need of solving the option pool dilemma. And our economy is in need of a smart, non-capital invasive solutions. And we currently believe that this is the best thing to be done. So currently, because people are asking, hey guys, what's going on with the Contractual JSC? Currently, it's still somewhere between the Council of Ministers and the legal department of the Ministry of Economy. So we're waiting. Every now and then they're calling us for example, to discuss a small article within the whole legislation proposal, but we're also waiting. And the moment when it's ready for public discussion in the Council of Ministers, I really hope you'll all understand, and I really hope that this would be very soon. Oh, and finally, I forgot to mention, it's good that I have the presentation in front of me, and I'll read part of it because I don't want to miss anything important. We believe that the contractual JSC elaborates on the current LLC that is currently operating in Bulgaria. It could be much more efficient on the legal and operational relationships between the investors and the companies, and would be also possible to protect all legal stakeholders, which means if you're a small investor, because for example, some of the startups right now, they need short investment of, let's say, you see 10,000 euro, and they don't have from where to take it. And if a VC fund has already invested in them, it's very hard to get this funding and give a small fraction of your company. And this is, especially in the COVID situation, once again, we saw how urgent it is to have this new type of legal entity approved by the government. Finally, because I see that the time is running, you could see in our report, in the comparative analysis, that we have the proposals of more than 20 countries. In general, BESCO is looking up to France and Germany, because we believe they have the best startup legislation in Europe, and also to a smaller extent Austria and the Netherlands, and of course the UK. But the UK, they're not part of the continental law, so some of their measures are not always applicable in Bulgaria. So looking at what these these countries did, France have an 80 million package to fund the bridge between two fundraising rounds, which is especially important for the startups and scale-ups that are in their growth phase. We believe that this could be done in Bulgaria as well, once again through the VCs. Also, the state guaranteed treasury loans, by the way, they cover up to twice the wage bill of people, and if it's even higher, then it could go up to 25% of the annual revenue of the companies. You could see, by the way, that Germany also has covered loans. By the way, it works with the state bank KfW, which is the equivalent of the Bulgarian Development Bank, and they have, you see, 610 billion US dollars have been prepared for this. So of course, this is not only startups, but much of it is startups. Sorry, going back to France. There's also an accelerated fund of corporate tax credits, which will be refundable in 2020. And what we think is the most important is including the research tax credit, which shows that really for France, the R&D companies are very important, and they have focused there. And finally, they have an accelerated payment of innovation support grants of 250 million. So if we have to compare this to Bulgaria, in Bulgaria we have a one-size-fits-all we give to all the companies. And what we believe is that the government should support the R&D intensive companies which are developing products, because this is where we have the high added value in the economy. And we believe that, not, of course, because we're defending the interest of tech companies, but if we have to sacrifice someone, then for sure I wouldn't sacrifice the high-tech companies, because if we have successful such companies, they could really help the whole economy and all the surroundings and clustered companies and organizations that they work with. So looking more on the Germany and their measures, they started it's called Economy Stabilization Fund that supports the economy with 600 billion that I mentioned. By the way, the loans here, because the number is higher, this one is exactly for support of the economy in situation of coronavirus. And here, this is for the outcomes from the coronavirus. Probably the thing that we think is most applicable in Bulgaria is having one-off grants, which goes for employees. So you see here, it's 9,000 for if the company is up to 5 people, and 15,000 if the company is up to 10 full-time employees. And finally, you see that Germany also wants to fight liquidity issues with tax measures. So this is, I would say, these are the most important parts of the report. Excuse me if I've been talking too quickly. These are my contacts. I'm available. By the way, I realized that I should have put the contacts of Ned Dervenkov, who was the person who wrote the report. But if you have any questions, I'll just open the stage here. So yeah, we have, by the way, Ned, if you want to join with audio, I think this would be possible. But Ned says that companies have been selected both through one-on-one meetings. Yeah, Ned mentions that we have had literally hundreds of conversations, and we have added much of this information out of not only from the report, but from our day-to-day activities. There we have Ned Dervenkov. Ned, do we hear each other? So, hi, Ned.
Sorry about my outfit. It's quarantine, so
Your outfit is perfect. This is how we're working in the startup community. We see birds. We know you're having good times, so probably I'll give you the opportunity to also answer some of the questions that we have from people, and probably say some specifics on the presentation that I have forgotten to mention.
Well, yeah, I think you've covered the essential topics. What I would really like to stress is that BESCO is probably the only organization that provides non-fiscal opportunities through the creation of the option pool, as you mentioned. But I would like to further elaborate that we have not only solved well, we didn't solve it because it's still not voted, but we actually have a bill, a legislative bill that's been on for the past 13 months. We've been in a group, in a working group with the 7 different ministries, and what we actually gave away was a new type of legal entity. It's called the Contractual Joint Stock Company. So in essence, it's something in between a limited liability company and a conventional joint stock company. Why? For various reasons. Reason number 1, it's easy and cheap to set it up like a limited liability company, but also has most of the benefits of a contractual of a conventional joint stock company, meaning that you can easily issue out your option pools. You can easily regulate terms such as vesting. You can easily work around the convertible debt, which is, as we all know, a very probably the most famous way to invest in startups. Currently in the Bulgarian legislation, you can still do those. Of deal, and it's really hard to justify the protection of the investor, to justify the interest and the protection of your employees. So yes, we're solving that through actually proposing a new type of legal entity, and of course we don't invent the wheel. We've seen this working in France, we've seen this working in Poland, we've seen it working in Estonia. So we pretty much took the best of the good practices we have around Europe, and yeah, we proposed that. It's very hard to explain this and the necessity of this new type of legal entity to the government, because they say, hey, you have the limited liability company, you have the joint stock company, why don't you use it? So it takes some time, but hopefully our bill would soon enter the Ministry of Councils, and then from there go to the Parliament, and hopefully we would have a functional type of legal entity that actually corresponds to the needs of the 21st century and the businesses in the 21st century. So I would say that this is the, you know, we could always ask for loans, we could always ask for grants. VC debt is something innovative that we think would work, but at the end of the day, the only thing that we're asking for is for a political will, so that the new type of legal entity actually becomes reality, and it's a non-fiscal, cheap way to preserve your employees and offer them shares instead of laying them off, for instance. So that's one thing.
Great, Ned. Thanks. By the way, you could stay to answer some of the other questions on behalf of the BESCO team.
Yeah.
So we have a few questions. So Georgi Demirov asked how our companies recruited to participate in the survey. So what we did is we reached out, of course, social media, and we did call a few specific companies that we wanted to have them there, but in general it was just social media. Anything to add, Ned?
I really like your shirt.
Oh, thank you. So do I. Yours, or the absence of it. Yeah, by the way, Buyan B says that he disagrees very strongly. He says that startups are at higher risk by definition, and that public tenders should carry a huge premium for low risk. This is true in general, but this doesn't mean, because very often what startups do, especially in the IT field, on the one hand, they do some outsourcing work, development, just to make something to pay the bills, and then they work on their innovative product. And many of them, because of this sort of schizo situation, they're not able to focus. But I could say that really a huge part of them are, although they're high risk through their production part, their product, they could be very low risk on, for example, doing services and working on tenders for public entities.
Yeah, I would like to add that the whole idea behind public tenders is, I totally agree and totally understand the concept that startups are risky entities, but there are certain aspects in public administration that could be handled to more advanced-minded companies. We have good examples with that, with Sofia municipality, still nothing live and kicking, but I think that smaller bits that concern digitalization and that concern innovations in terms of the way we process business as usual could be handled. We're not talking about, you know, building highways, but we're actually we're willing to think about a way that startups and their innovative thinking can actually solve problems. And there is no way for that to happen currently in public administration. So we're thinking of ways, and it's a very, you know, early stage idea, and it's hard to put it on rock solid examples, say, okay, this is the way it should be done. It's a matter of public discussion, but again, it's happening in the modern Western world, so why not in Bulgaria?
Yeah. By the way, I see we have a question from Andrea Mariani from Italy. It's very good to see you, Andrea. Just to let you know, Andrea is an Italian entrepreneur. Also, he's a mathematician and a scientist that we've been discussing that he would come to establish his startup in Bulgaria. So his question is, when do you think that Bulgarian borders will open again for foreigners, and how other startups deal with the lockdown? That's a really great question, as people say. Now we don't have the answer of this question. It all depends on the government. I would say that the sooner the better. And a proposal that we could have is, as long as you have been tested for COVID and have a negative test, that it would be okay for you to come. So in brief, Andrea, we're waiting. So everything that we spoke, like, we're still alive. And as for how other startups deal with the lockdown, well, they're just enjoying life somewhere in the nature, like Ned.
Migration and mobility is a big issue, and as mentioned in my moment, I know it's a different topic, but I'm just putting that as in perspective, just to let you know how the government is actually considering facts. Yesterday we got to know that if people go to Greece or Turkey for tourism, they will be quarantined for 14 days. So it's some sort of interesting discrimination towards certain countries. So having that in perspective and putting tourism as a main focus and acting very weirdly in that aspect really does not give me great hopes on other type of mobility. I think that what our government is waiting for is what it's been waiting for ever since we joined the EU, a EU regulation that we can copy and paste. And most of the work that BESCO does is actually to read those regulations and propose and readjust and make them adequate for our reality. So in essence, I don't think we would be seeing some very aggressive and entrepreneurial type of move that would enable mobility unless our bigger brothers from the union agree that there should be one that is valid for all countries. So this is a very, very gray area, unfortunately. So that's why I'm here. That's I'm quarantined in my village and wearing a nice outfit.
Yeah, but we can, as we mentioned earlier, we can enjoy life, and thanks to digitalization, we could work from pretty much any part of the world as long as we have internet, and that's the case. So we got probably around 15 minutes more. I don't see any other questions. Amelie has mentioned that there should be a process for startups to participate in consortiums for public tenders, but as they're high risk, they should not do it alone. This is also very true. We've been talking with larger companies, and part of probably, I would say, around 10% to 15% of our activity is just matchmaking amongst small companies with small companies and larger ones. But also part of the situation is that also not all startups want to participate in public tenders just because of the heavy bureaucracy. So if that's the case, unless you don't have any other questions, then I have questions. And because the only person online that I could talk to is Ned. Ned, can you tell us more on actually what is currently hot in BESCO, on what we guys are currently doing?
Yes, we are all over the place, for good or bad. It has its drawbacks, but we've defined, again, through keeping constant touch with our members, is that there are two essential pains currently. Well, the two most important, probably. There are many pains and they're all essential, but we've discovered that startups are in need for two things mainly: money and people. The people issue, I think the contractual joint stock company and the option pool and the actual tools that you can motivate your employees and compete for talent, not with money but with promises, and sometimes these promises grow big. This is the way to go. In terms of money, what we are really still brainstorming and still figuring out, because again, it's a delicate topic, but we want to actually initiate a reform alongside with Bulgarian Venture Capital Association, is where pension funds can actually invest in VCs, and according to our estimates, this would mean another 500 to 600 million euros in public money for startups. So I know it sounds shocking. It's like, oh no, the investment, the pension funds, don't go there, but it's actually again a practice that is very, very well established in the developed economies. And currently the Bulgarian legislation allows for up to 1% of the pension funds to go into startups. In reality, it doesn't happen at all. Our proposal is to increase the level of somewhere in between 5 to 10%. But before that, the current 1% is not really happening because there is virtually no understanding of the need for startups to be financed in such a way, and there is not even an understanding how would that actually work. So we're in a very, very early stage of creating awareness among Ministry of Finance and the Commission for Financial Advisory, KFN. Things are looking very old school there, and we're trying to give good examples of how developed economies are actually doing that. We've initiated a conversation with the pension funds themselves, and we don't really see much friction there for them. Well, of course, things change now because of the COVID-19 situation, so we need to reopen the conversation. But if 5% of a pension fund savings is allocated into risk investments, this is totally feasible for the funds, for the pension funds themselves. So now we have the gatekeeper in the face of the Ministry of Finance and the Commission for Financial Advisory, which, to be honest, are not very collaborative. We all know that the Bulgarian Fund Exchange has opened its BEAM program, which is an access to tech companies to go on the stock exchange, but not submit a proposal to KFN, meaning that you can easily get up to 2 million euros of public money through the BEAM system, which works perfectly in Germany, in the UK, in the Netherlands. And again, the Commission for Financial Advisory says, like, no, this is not going to happen. And they keep, there's even friction between the Commission for Financial Advisory and the Bulgarian Stock Exchange, which are supposedly should work in the same direction, the same vision. So I'm just outlining the complexity and the hardship that we face when we have to re-educate very conservative structures such as the Ministry of Finance. But this is how BESCO started. Back in 2017, we literally had to explain that the reason that you have registered two limited liabilities companies under your name does not make you a rich person. This was the understanding. I had a conversation with a lady from the administration, and she was like, okay, you have two companies under your name, so you must be rich. I'm like, no, in what world? I mean, they're not working, they're just standing there. So we literally started taking administration and deputy ministers and ministers to co-working spaces, and they were having tough times understanding that this is not a single company working, but there are multiple companies under one roof, and that they're freelancers. So back in 2017, we started there, and we slowly see that there is progress. So we figured out that even if we go to very old school way of thinking into the finance ministry, then with persistence, I think we can actually manage to penetrate, and of course be reasonable in our ask and our demands, and don't go naked on public, as what I'm doing right now.
Great, thanks. And I'll allow myself to ask a last question because our time is almost up, and I know it's not good to be the person talking good word about yourself. But last week we had a conversation. There was a big call with Allied for Startups that I mentioned, and I think we were more than 50 people. We were people like from Malaysia, the US, all across Europe. And then I'd like to ask you what some of the people said about BESCO, because this was something that I didn't expected.
I was very very surprised myself. So in essence, there were 23 countries, 23 representatives of startup associations globally, mainly in Europe. But I was in a breakout room with a guy from Malaysia, Greece, Romania, and France, and we were discussing how our governments are doing in the current situation. So, of course, sorry about the background noise. This is just too nice here. But anyways, the French people were really well. We don't have any problems. There's 4 billion for us, so we don't have any problems. And then every other country mentioned its problems. Long story short, what would really shock me and surprise me, and actually led me to an idea, is that the Romanian and the Greek representatives of the startup organization said, "Okay, we're close to observing BESCO, and I think BESCO is leading the way." And I'm quoting.
Hey, did we lose the connection? So is Net online? I guess we lost the connection in the most crucial moment where actually the guys from Romania and Greece were saying some good words about BESCO and
a digital leader in the region. So this is a way of thinking for Bulgaria, and I think what we are doing is showing that even in, by presumption, highly corrupted, non-efficient governments, I'm not making any statements here, this is just the general opinion, we can actually make a change through persistence. And BESCO really started as a goodwill of a few guys, and then it really turned out to be an organization of over 500 companies. So this is really, maybe the timing is right. The timing is now. I mean, sometimes we get a little bit demotivated because things are happening much slower than we think they should. But in the end of the day, if we look the development for the past 3 years, a lot has been achieved, and of course there's a million miles away to go. But all of us, all together, we are all pieces of the puzzle, and all together we should unite and go forward. And this is not just the saying; we do see it in action, and the phony word that we put in our pitch decks.
Thanks a lot, Ned. I think that's a good place to end the session. I'll once again share my screen. These are our contacts, our emails, my phone number. And if you have any pains or just want to reach out, we'll be really very glad. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and all the best. Stay safe. That's what we say. Goodbye.